Aaron Rodgers welcomes the Packers into his new home as Green Bay takes on the Pittsburgh Steelers. Green Bay has lost 6 of their last 7 matchups against the Steelers and haven't won one since Rodgers left. Can Love get Green Bay right, or will Rodgers notch his first win against the Pack? We'll see in the simulation, but first, let's get behind the bar and make our drink a Tipsy Badger. Oh boy, yeah, you know the narrative for this game is going to be all about Aaron. I actually didn't realize that this was his first game against the Packers until researching for this video. Now, sadly, I don't have any ayahuasca on hand, so we'll have to look elsewhere for inspiration. That said, Green Bay's representative this week could probably be considered a mind-altering substance. It's the Wisconsin Old Fashioned. Was that segue a little bit of a stretch? Yeah, probably. But anyways, the Wisconsin Old Fashioned, aka the Brandy Old Fashioned, aka a crime against mixology. First step in understanding the Wisconsin Old Fashioned is to forget everything else you know about Old Fashions. See, a normal Old Fashioned is the equivalent of seasoning a great piece of steak with a bit of salt, maybe some pepper if you're feeling frisky. It's typically a 2-ounce pour of a spirit, typically whiskey or rum, something with a lot of age to it, 1/4 to 1/2 ounce of simple syrup, and then 2 dashes of Angostura Bitters. The simple syrup helps round off some of the edges of the spirit, and the Angostura Bitter helps pull forward some different flavor notes, but the spirit is really 100% the star of the show. The Wisconsin Old Fashioned, on the other hand, is like taking a $5 manager special steak, covering it in Montreal steak seasoning, and then drowning it in A1 steak sauce to ensure that really none of the flavor of that actual meat is coming through. We still start off with a 2-ounce pour of a spirit, except this time, instead of a nice aged whiskey or rum, it's 2 ounces of the cheapest brandy that you happen to have on hand. Still keep the 1/4 ounce of simple syrup. We're gonna muddle in an orange and a cocktail cherry. We're gonna slam the amount of bitters in it from 2 dashes up to 4, and then top it off with a splash of soda as well, just to make sure that we're really masking all that brandy. Now, I know that all sounded harsh, but this is an interesting drink. It's just not a particularly refined or classy one. And that's not exactly breaking news. I mean, even the cheeseheads who love this drink won't pretend like it's high art. It's a drink with an interesting history and a lot going on, but also a rude surprise for anybody who thinks they're going to get a normal old-fashioned when they order it on the menu. It's kind of like pulling into a gas station in New Jersey and finding out that you're not allowed to pump your own gas. There's nothing inherently wrong with it, but it sure is a bit of a rude surprise if you're not expecting it. Speaking of expectations, if you're expecting Pittsburgh's representative this week to be for the Steelers, think again. That's right, I'm cheating and using their hockey team in this matchup. Representing Pittsburgh, it's the Tipsy Penguins. Now, funny thing about this drink, it comes to us courtesy of Breckenridge Distillery, which is actually the official distillery of an NFL team, just not the Steelers. It's actually the Broncos distillery, but I saw Tipsy Penguin, and I just couldn't pass up using it as Pittsburgh's representative this week. The drink is basically a whiskey sour, but they did make a couple of interesting additions and changes to it. First off, instead of your traditional simple syrup, they use a brown sugar, vanilla, and maple syrup, which sounds absolutely delicious, even if I am too lazy to make it myself. And secondly, they add in an additional 2 ounces of apple juice, which they explicitly state is unfiltered apple juice, aka apple cider. That addition, combined with 4 dashes of chocolate bitters, really gives this drink a kind of holiday feel to it. So a little bit of a strange matchup, but it wasn't too hard to get these 2 drinks to play nice with each other. Now, if the Packers actually had a mascot, I would just call this drink the Tipsy, insert mascot name here. But they don't, and since Tipsy Cheesehead is just a synonym for Packers fans, I instead headed south to Madison and decided to call this drink the Tipsy Badger. So that being said, the final spec for this is going to be 1 ounce of bourbon. Honestly, I probably would have used like a cheaper rye if I had it, but I used up that bottle, and yeah. 1 ounce of our brandy. Now again, this really should be like a cheaper brandy, but in case you don't know, cognac is brandy, and this is what I happen to have on hand, which means this is technically the cheapest brandy I own. If I went and bought a bottle of cheap brandy, that would be spending more money. So cheapest brandy I own, gonna be that. 1/2 ounce of maple syrup. Really leaning into the fall vibes of the flannel as well, we finally got some cool weather here, so I'm going to enjoy it. I need more maple syrup. I'm running out. God damn. Half an ounce of lemon juice. A little bit of acidity. Two ounces of apple juice, aka apple cider. Again, we are referring to non-alcoholic, unfiltered apple juice. And yes, this was the smallest container of apple cider I was able to buy. Why they did not have any half gallons available, I do not know. I'm upset about it, but it is what it is. And then finally, 3 dashes of Angostura Bitters, aka bartender's ketchup. My beloved. All right, I'm gonna shake that up. All right. Strain that into our rocks glass. Such a pretty sort of like pinkish orangey color. All right, and this is our Tipsy Badger. Let's give it a taste. Oh yeah. I mean, really, can't ask for anything more out of this kind of drink. This is part of a, this is part of what I would call like a larger category of apple pie in a glass type drinks. There's a lot of flexibility for it, but basically like the solid template of any kind of really like brown spirit, ideally like a whiskey of some kind. You can go with a rye if you want it a bit punchier. You can go with a bourbon if you want it smoother. But any kind of like whiskey really, maple syrup, lemon juice, apple cider, and Angostura Bitters is going to create this like incredibly nice, refreshing apple pie in a glass type fall drink. And that's exactly what we have in this glass. You really can't go wrong with that sort of template. I do think it would have been interesting to do this with a full 2-ounce base of brandy instead of doing the split base between the bourbon and the brandy. Because you get, I mean, mine's a cognac, but you get some of the notes of it coming through. And it does add an interesting little twist to the sort of standard, you know, apple pie drink. It is definitely like, it's coming through more than I actually initially expected it to. It's bringing those sort of grape pit type notes to it. And it's adding an interesting sort of wrinkle of character. It really does, like, I think it elevates this drink beyond just being a sort of like, you know, almost jungle juicy type like party punch. You know, I think adding that cognac in there really does put a bit of a spin on it. And so I'd be interested to see if, you know, if we went up to just a full 2-ounce pour of that and we weren't splitting the base, would we get more of those notes and would it feel like more of a sort of like distinct drink as opposed to more of just sort of like a riff on this base formula? It's an interesting question. It's an interesting thing to explore. But yeah, other than that, I don't think there's a huge amount for me to sort of like break down in this drink. It really is just a delicious, perfectly balanced fall drink. It's not too sweet, you know, but it's certainly not biting. It's certainly not a challenging drink. You know, this is an excellent sort of thing to serve at a party, you know, if you're doing like a watch party for this game. Yeah, easy to make. I think you could batch this really easily as well if you wanted to. I haven't experimented with like really sort of batching and storing cocktails yet, but I would anticipate this being a pretty easy one to do it for because none of the contents in this are too explicitly volatile. And in the inspiration for this drink, I sort of, I definitely leaned a bit more towards the Tipsy Penguin and kind of took the path of least resistance in creating this drink. But I wanted to lean into sort of the origin of the Wisconsin Old Fashioned, right? Like, that is a drink that is primarily designed to hide poor quality booze. And so I kind of followed that same, rationale in this one. Admittedly, my booze is far high quality than what would be hidden in a traditional Old Fashioned. But yeah, I mean, it really does, it covers up any harshness, but you actually get it coming through a decent amount. You still get the bourbon and the brandy coming through. You can still tell that it's an alcoholic drink, just not particularly strongly. Yeah, really just a lovely fall cocktail. I mean, I don't have a whole lot more to break down on that front, It certainly looks the part, it tastes the part, it ticks all the boxes. Again, I don't think it's particularly original. I don't think it's going to sort of like blow anybody's mind, but it is a very good drink, lovely for a cool day, and it's going to power me to get through this matchup in the simulation. Now, the Steelers start with the ball first, but they promptly go 3 and out as this Packers defense makes its presence felt. In response, the Steelers defense bends but doesn't break on Green Bay's first drive, sacking Love on a 3rd down in the red zone to force the field goal. A second Steelers 3 and out confirms that this is going to be a defensive brawl, as the rest of the first quarter passes without a score. In the second quarter now, Xavier McKinney drags down Calvin Austin on 3rd down, so the Steelers break out Boswell, who hits the 51-yarder to tie the game up. And if the offenses can't find the end zone, maybe special teams can. Chris Brooks breaks one tackle, makes about 4 defenders miss, and is off to the races, eventually being chased down at the 9-yard line. Now, he may have been stopped short, but a screen to Josh Jacobs seals the deal, putting the Packers up 7 with the game's first touchdown. It takes basically the rest of the second quarter, but the Packers finally reach the end zone again, where a dart to Wicks puts the Pack up a seemingly insurmountable 14 points. As expected, the Steelers are unable to add any points before half, leaving Green Bay's 2-score lead fully intact. Things start to flip in the second half, though, as the Steelers are now in the red zone, but Rodgers' pass to DK is broken up and actually nearly intercepted, causing the Steelers to settle for their second field goal of the game. Now, the Packers actually moved the ball quite well on their next drive, but Love's 3rd down shot at the end zone is incomplete, so they kick the chip shot field goal to push their lead back to a clean 14 points. Facing a 3rd and 1 on their following drive, the Steelers make the questionable decision to have 41-year-old Aaron Rodgers QB sneak it, which just barely comes up short. However, that's followed up by the even more questionable and cowardly decision to kick the field goal on 4th and inches while down 14 points in a defensive slugfest. The Steelers make the field goal, but the football gods are disgusted and declare that there shall be no more scoring for the rest of this game. This divine intervention is first seen here. Packers on the 5-yard line, practically guaranteed to add something to the scoreboard, but Love is strip-sacked and the Steelers recover the ball. With 3 minutes left in the game, the Steelers find themselves in 3rd and inches again. The gods use this opportunity to remind them of their sins, as Rodgers' attempt at the end zone is picked off by Nate Hobbs. After a futile drive by each team, the time finally runs out in this game as the Packers leave Pittsburgh with a 20-9 win. Now, this does feel like a very on-brand game for both of these teams. The Packers' defense looked like it might have been heading towards another late-game implosion in the 3rd quarter, but the Steelers' act of extreme cowardice shifted the momentum firmly back towards Green Bay. Well, Love handily outdueled his predecessor in this matchup, putting up more yards, higher completion percentage, more touchdowns, fewer interceptions. It just wasn't even close. Part of that is likely due to game script. That incredible kick return put the Packers ahead and let them run the ball a lot more than the Steelers, which tends to make life easier on your quarterback, but this is also just an absolutely below average game for Rodgers. Over on the rushing side of things, this is absolutely a return to form for Jacobs, as he hasn't had a 100-yard game yet this season, but posted 3 last year. Jalen Warren had a hyper-efficient game, racking up 65 yards on a very limited 7 carries. Shame they weren't able to feed him the ball more. And for once, we don't have any crazy quarterback rushing stats, especially for Rodgers, who has a bad habit of running like he's found the fountain of youth. As for the receivers, it's the rookie Matthew Golden leading the way for the Packers, topping the team with a nice 69 yards on 7 catches. Josh Jacobs also added to his impressive rushing performance with 5 catches for 64 yards and a touchdown. Meanwhile, it's actually a Steeler who put up the most yards in this game, Calvin Austin turning 6 receptions into 76 yards. The Steelers' running backs had less success through the air, with neither one breaking 15 yards. Also at the bottom of the stat sheet is Dontavian Wicks, who only had 1 catch for 11 yards, but also turned it into one of the only 2 touchdowns of the game. Jordan Love also outdueled Aaron Rodgers in the Monte Carlo sim, putting up 213 yards to Aaron's 150. Rushing-wise, Josh Jacobs also had a very good game here, but falls a bit short of his 110 Madden yards. On the Steelers side, I forgot to update their depth chart to have Kenneth Gainwell as their RB2, so whoops. Surprisingly, much more muted performances from all of the receivers in this one, as nobody manages to break 50 yards through the air. Now this is a more normal looking score distribution than the Thursday night game, but it still is certainly a defensive brawl, with the odds of Pittsburgh being shut out especially high. The most likely outcome is a 14-7 Packers victory, with a similar margin of victory in the average result, an 18-12 Packers victory. So honestly, the Monte Carlo sim and the Madden sim are pretty similar for this game. Do you agree with the simulations, or do you envision a different future? I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts down in the comments. As a reminder, our drink for this matchup is the perfectly balanced fall classic, the Tipsy Badger. If you make it, please let me know what you think, and I'd love to hear your suggestions for what drink should be your team's representative. Stay curious, stay thirsty, and I'll see you in the next one.